If you've been following along for any amount of time, you know that one of my biggest messages to y'all is that you need an outline. But I also hear from a lot of people that they're not really sure what that means. And since I totally get it, outline can mean a lot of different things. Today I wanted to do a deep dive into the anatomy of a memoir outline. Stay tuned.
You've been writing your memoir, maybe even for years. You know your material, you know what it means. What's missing isn't the story, it's the structure. And that's why we started the Memoir Method Book Club. Every single month, Emily Thrash, a professional writer and editor, teaches you how to read like a writer by breaking down a published memoir and showing you what it's doing under the surface. Your first session is free. Head over to pageandpodium.com/book club to sign up.
I can be a broken record when it comes to recommending that my clients create outlines before they even start writing. But oftentimes we don't take the time to really dig deep into what type of outline will actually help you. Because there are lots of ways that you can outline a project, and only some of them are actually going to be beneficial. Others are very likely to be that time waste that I find so many people assume all outlines to be. And part of the issue I do find is that oftentimes when I talk about outlining, we have so much baggage from our days in school that we're very often kind of challenged to figure out how to actually use this idea, an outline, to move our project forward. Now, I get this better than most. I spent a lot of years in the college classroom teaching various classes, but I taught public speaking for a long time. And one of the things about public speaking class is you always have to make an outline for every speech you're going to do. Now, I taught my students how to create outlines, the same way that I am today, but I often found that where students were really concerned was that they were getting the kind of mechanics right. They wanted to make sure that they knew it was a Roman numeral at the top level, then a capital letter, then a number. And as they were going through kind of all of these different ways that you might structure technically your outline, oftentimes they lose sight of what the real purpose is. So there really are two ways that you benefit so much from creating this outline before you start writing. And if we start with these benefits in mind, I find that very often it's way easier to just make sure you do the outline right the first time so that it actually helps you move forward. So what are these two ways? Well, the first, of course, when we lay out an outline in advance, it usually should mean that we are also paying attention to our structure in advance. Now, you have no doubt heard me talk about structure. It is so crucially important. And if you haven't caught any of those episodes, scan back through the podcast, look through the blog on pageandpodium.com/blog, because this is something I talk about all of the time. But when we are thinking about structure, it is so important that we, the author, we, the writer, has a really clear sense from a 10,000-foot view of how the pacing of that book will move. How quickly will we move from plot point to plot point? Where will we place the climax and the denouement? Where will we start the book? Where will we end the book? All of these are factors that go into our consideration of structure. So even though a good structure is invisible to readers, knowing the structure as the author going in is going to help you make sure that you have planned that book in a way that really helps you tell a powerful story. Yes, structure is for readers, but it also is such a useful tool, especially in memoir where we're writing something that is so personal and that is based off of our fallible memory. It is so useful to have some sense of how much goes where and how we're laying that out in terms of that whole 10,000-foot view of our book. So that's the first reason that outlining should serve you. But the second way is really just a feeder off that first one, and that is that if you can get your outline nailed down, you have not only created yourself an outline, you have also created yourself a writing plan. The magical thing that happens when we plan out an outline like the one I'm going to talk about today is that we know at the end of every chapter where the next chapter will start, where it will end, the chapter after that, where it starts and ends, what goes in there, what doesn't. We have taken many, many choices off the table for ourselves in a way that's actually so freeing. When we make some of those decisions up front, we are really just free to get on that chapter train and write and write and write and write. We don't have to stop and make any of these high-level decisions. We knocked them out. So, thinking about these reasons, one, that an outline is really the only way you're going to build that structure in, and two, the way that creating that outline is actually going to be a really useful writing plan for you. You can see we have got to have an outline here. So, with that said, let me go through the anatomy of a memoir outline. And this is just effectively when I think about outlines that are useful for our clients, that are useful for me, for my staff, for my writing friends, industry friends. These are the things that are going to be the must-haves. So, without further ado, let's start right at the top. And what I would always suggest that you start with at the top of your outline is a working title. Now, this is controversial because, of course, at the point that you are outlining, you really have pretty much zero idea of what that title should be, even less of what it will be, especially if you're publishing traditionally, in which case your publisher may completely change your title. So why then am I saying you've got to start with a title up there? Just simply because a title, I find, makes the book real. And when we can settle on just a working title, not a final title, it is going to be so helpful to really keep at the front of your mind, not only the topic of your book, but also the vibe you're going for. What type of book are you writing? Usually, I find that getting that stylistic choice of what you want the title to be is just really, really motivating. It just helps people have kind of a clearer artistic vision of where they want to go. And of course, clarity is everything. Having that clear artistic vision is so, so valuable. So, number one, I would always start with a working title. Of course, you may or may not change it in the long run. You may change it many times in the long run. But having it down to start is just going to help you commit to this book, commit to this thing that you are doing so that you can move forward with the most confidence possible. All right, working title first. The second thing I want to make sure that you have, if not on your outline, at least in your head, but let me recommend you get it on the outline, and that is your book's topic. Now, I talk about this all the time. I just did a full episode on this last month that you can go back and find. Even though so many people that watch this channel are writing memoirs, I still recommend that you define your topic. Now, what do I mean by this? Because, of course, it's a memoir. Is the topic not you? Well, yes and no. When we think about writing a memoir, it is so important that we have a bounded topic, because otherwise it is too easy for your book to become an autobiography. Everything that happened in your life, birth to now. Instead, what we want to do is choose one slice of life. And suffice it to say, the reason is simply connecting with your readers. Most of the time, readers do not buy books because of a catchy title. They don't buy books because the cover's pretty. They don't even always buy books because of the topic. They buy books because they connect with the way you're positioning that book in the market. That is almost always your topic. So, what do I mean when I say topic? Well, typically, this is going to be the one major thing that happens to you and by you and with you throughout the course of the memoir. So this could be anything from founding your first business to adopting a child. It could be anything from surviving some type of a disease to leveling up in your career. Whatever it is you are doing, we want one thing that is the start to finish of that book. So commit to it and put it at the top of your outline if you feel like you may be tempted to stray. All right, second thing, we're going to put that topic up there. If you've been following this for long, you know the next thing I'm going to say, you've got to have the message. So While certainly our topic is important for narrowing down the part of our life we're talking about, it's also really important that we're saying something more than just simply, hey, this thing happened to me. And that is where we are going to use this message. When you think of the message, it is typically going to be at least related to the thing that you feel you learned through the process of that topic. And the reason is, if you feel like you learned that thing, that's almost always what you're going to be drawn to teach other people. It doesn't have to be something you learned, but we do want to define what is the message. Besides the story, what is the takeaway that you want your reader to have? Because while your story may be so exciting, the message is the thing that is going to allow the reader to really connect. Now, typically when I talk about this in terms of the umbrella of truth. Now, when we are thinking about truth, we are thinking about the broadest possible interpretation of what happened to us, how we interpret the thing that we experienced at the heart of that memoir. And that truth is where people connect. I may never have adopted a child myself. In fact, I haven't. But that doesn't mean I can't connect with a book about someone adopting a child if the truth is large enough that I can find myself underneath that umbrella with that author. That is message. So, thinking about that message, we've got to really know what it is you want to communicate to your readers. What is it that you want to share with them? Because when we have that front of mind, we are in such a better position to be making choices throughout that drafting process that serve our topic and serve our message. Okay, so right at the very top, we're going to put that working title, we're going to put that topic, we're going to put that message. And without further ado, we're going to get into the kind of hard part. So, a little bit of a behind the scenes kind of caveat, bit of context. Before you come to this form of outline, most writers really benefit from doing just a little bit lower pressure play. So what this typically looks like is something that I call a skeleton outline, but it can look like notes, it can look like anything you would like it to look like. For me, before I do a formal outline, the type I'm describing here, I like to go through and just by hand in a journal, jot down how I think that structure is going to play out. So when I'm doing that, I'm making kind of a list of chapters, although it really is more a list of pivotal scenes. When I do that, it's so much kind of easier to see how things fall into place. If I want to move something, replace it, can really see at a glance, because I can basically get that whole book onto kind of one notebook page. Now, you will need to have done that before you come into my next piece of memoir anatomy, which is you should have a full list moving all the way down the outline of every chapter you will include. Now, this kind of harkens back to my first bit of advice about your working title. I would also suggest that you have a working title for each chapter. My reason is very similar, but with a little bit of a nuanced difference. And that is that when we have a working title for each chapter, we not only know what's going to go in the chapter, I'll get to that in a second, but we also have a sense of what vibe we want. When we are creating these working titles, we can go really dramatic, really heavy, really bold. We can go lighter, funny, kind of put a little pun or a joke in there. And that is gold. For this at-a-glance view that we are creating in this entire outline process, one thing we really want is to be able to, at a glance, see the whole book. And working titles for your chapters are going to help you do that every single time. And plus, it's kind of fun. All right, so once you have listed all of your chapters with their working chapter titles, the next thing really is the part that's going to take you the most time. And let me tell you, this takes me longer than I think it will every single time I do it. And I've been doing it for a long time. So be ready for this to take you some time. But the next thing on your memoir outline anatomy is you need about 100 to 150 words in a description for each of those chapters. Now, what's 100 to 150 words? If we were double spacing, which typically I will single space on an outline, but if we were double spacing, One page is about 300 words times New Roman 12-point double space. So think about a third to a half of a page if it were double spaced. That's about how much you're putting into each of these chapter descriptions. If you go a little over, that's fine, but we really do encourage you to keep it to 100 to 150 words because we are making choices. Remember what I mentioned earlier. As you go through and make these structural choices, one of the ways that you are serving both yourself and your readers down the line is that you are making some of the choices in advance, so that as you get into the drafting, the choices that really need to be made at that level are going to be so much easier to make because you're not messing around at the structure level, you are in the actual weeds. We already handled the structural level choices with our outline. The problem is when we try to do too much description per chapter, so going well over that 150 words, what often happens is we don't hold ourselves accountable. We aren't honest with ourselves about how much can really fit into a chapter. And truly I find if you cannot write the description in 150 words, almost always you've got too much going on. So go chapter by chapter by chapter by chapter and write out these little descriptions. As you are doing that, I promise you, you are going to start to see the ways that your skeleton outline is strong and the ways that you actually maybe need to revisit it. This will typically look like chapters that either feel really thin, feel way, way bloated, but sometimes it also is kind of pacing. Sometimes it's jumps in chronology. Sometimes it's continuity errors or repetition. You will see this as you make yourself go into each chapter and write yourself the description. It will become so obvious to you what you need to fix. And as you write more and more and more books, which I hope you will, it gets easier and easier and easier down the line. So truly, this is the most important component of your memoir outline, is that you have these individual 100 to 150 word summaries. When you get those written, you have done so much of the legwork for yourself. You have done so much to ensure your reader has an enjoyable experience with that book. And you have done so much for yourself when 4 or 5 months down the line, you're suddenly on chapter 18, 19, 20, and you cannot remember what you were thinking. So get those chapter descriptions down. They're so, so, so helpful. And the last piece of the anatomy of a really helpful memoir is I want you to think about what is within those chapter descriptions. Now, as you are writing each description, you will, again, be making quite a lot of choices. And one of the choices you will find that you need to make over and over again is what is the centerpiece scene of that chapter. Now, I am not saying that chapters can't have more than one scene. Of course, most chapters do, actually. But rather, what I'm saying is, what's the point of turn? What's the point of change? What's the point in that chapter that really matters, that moves the story forward? We might call this a plot point, regardless what you want to call it. What is that point that really changes the story, changes you, changes your perspective? We need one thing for that. Now, below your chapter descriptions, we have an optional addition. I personally do this and I recommend it, but mileage may vary, make your own choices. But I also like, for this scene narrowing process, to keep one scene kind of center stage, the star of the show in each of these chapter descriptions. But then underneath, I like to do a series of bullet points. This will usually be 5, no more than 10 probably, of other scenes, other points, ideas, research, whatever it might be that you want to land in that chapter. This is helpful for a couple of reasons. One, when you get into that drafting, you'll be able to kind of see an inventory of what you thought would go in that chapter. But the other way it's helpful, you're making tough choices, right? You got to pick just one scene. And often it feels like pulling out your own teeth. So having that list of scenes allows you a placeholder. You can put other scenes that didn't quite make the cut in that chapter description, but you still want to make sure you didn't forget them. So your bulleted list underneath your chapter descriptions is a great place to store stuff like this. Okay, and then the last thing I want you to make sure that you're including within those chapter descriptions is attention to the audience. It is so easy to forget when we are in writing mode that the entire purpose of writing mode is really to help our reader enjoy the ride. As they are reading through the book, we want them to feel like they're being propelled forward. That is structure, but it's also intentional attention to your reader. Who they are, what they like, what they don't like, what they're around, what they're not around. So I want you to then go through that outline and really be clear with yourself. Are each of these chapters serving my reader in some way? This doesn't need to be you're teaching them a lesson, doesn't need to mean that every single chapter has its own message. But is the reader getting something out of this? Or is it just something that you want to write? It's tough to kind of face that in yourself, but we do want to make sure that the outline, just like the book, is going to serve your reader. And making decisions with that in mind from the very beginning is always the best way to go. Okay, when you have finished this outline, the last note that I want to give you is that this is an external outline. Once we have moved through all of these pieces of anatomy, you should have a finished draft of an outline that not only will help you move forward with the drafting process, but also that will allow you to get feedback. And oh my goodness, y'all, getting feedback before you start writing, it's gold. It's gold. We love it. So take that outline and ask a couple of trusted people, maybe a professional. This is, by the way, a service that Page and Podium offers to review your outline. Now, I've got lots of videos on how to get effective feedback from your readers. Suffice it to say, in this video, you do need to be specific about what you're looking for. Typically, with outline review, we will ask that any kind of a reader that is not, a trained editor, we will ask them to really think about continuity. So in other words, does this flow? Does it all make sense as one continuous story? We'll ask them to think about whether there were any kind of inconsistencies or things that seemed unclear, things that as they were reading through, they just really weren't sure what was going on. And we'll ask them to identify anything that feels out of place. So that might be a chapter or multiple chapters, we hope not, but it could be. Or it could just be simply something either in the bulleted list or within your description that just didn't really feel like it fit in the whole book as a whole. Ask them for some suggestions that you can get, guide them in how they're going to give you those suggestions, and you will find that if you can refine, revise, strengthen your outline before you start writing, you are in such a good spot to really knock that book out and have it be something you are so, so proud of. Okay, if you are in this stage where you are just getting started on your outline, let me tell you, whether or not you've started drafting, you are a perfect fit for the Memoir Method group program. In fact, one of my proudest aspects of this program is the 7-step, step-by-step process we have for your development. This is going to help take you through that topic, that message, and most importantly, the structure. And while we're not going to tell you the right or wrong of a structure, there are things that you need to make sure you hit. Our step-by-step process is going to help take you through that so that you can get everything you need in the places that you need it, while still giving yourself the creative freedom to express what it is you want to express. So we would love to have you join us in the program. Reach out. You can apply for the program at pageandpodium.com/contact. Part of that is just filling out a quick little form, letting us know about the book project you have in mind. From there, you are able to schedule a call with me directly, and we can talk about your project, we can talk about you, we can talk about the group, the offer, any questions that you have, just to make sure that we have really welcomed you into a program that is the right fit. We are very, very selective with who we allow into the program because we believe so strongly in what we do. We want to make sure that everyone that comes through there gets that same experience of really feeling so, so solid on the work that they are doing. Okay, off of my soapbox, head over to pageandpodium.com/contact to book a call like that, and we can talk about how we can help you move forward in the development, in the structure, and of course, in the outline of your memoir. And until then, happy writing.
You know that feeling when a book just hits you? Not because the story is wild, but because it's shaped so intentionally that it almost makes you rethink your own story. You finish that last page and think, how did they do that? The structure, the honesty, the clarity. There's something under the surface that you just can't put your finger on. And the reason is, unless someone shows you how memoirs actually work, it's hard to translate that inspiration into your own writing. And that's exactly why we created the Memoir Method Monthly Book Club. If you want to join Emily Thrash every single month to dig into an exemplary memoir and figure out what's happening under the surface, head over to pageandpodium.com/book club. Your first month is free, and we can't wait to welcome you to the group.